We just talked not long ago.
I have Cold Zero, right? You
Yeah,
talked to
right.
Ward and you talked to me. That's
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
exactly. So always a pleasure, always a treat to talk to you to get some of your time.
Thank you. And I appreciate the incredibly thoughtful reviews that you write. You do a great job and you're very kind. So thank you, John.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, and a lot of thought and time goes into those reviews. I enjoy doing them. I'm planning on continuing to do them for the foreseeable future. So thank you. I appreciate that. That means a lot when when authors appreciate that kind of work. And I don't do, I don't do it. People have asked me before, like, well, would you do a negative review? And I said, I told that person who asked me that, I said, my negative review is not doing the review.
Right. Right.
That's my
Yeah.
negative review. And I don't really like the idea of negative reviews because I know what kind of labor of love goes into
Yeah.
producing whether it's a novel or nonfiction or whatever it
Yeah.
may be. And I just don't have it in me to do that. James Comey, he's written a couple uh,
Oh, yeah. Thrillers now.
yeah, he's written a couple thrillers and I haven't really gotten through one of them yet. Not
Oh,
that it's
wow.
not that it's bad writing, whatever, but I'm not going to go out there and do some snarky review of
Yeah.
James Comey's book. To me, when you're talking about thrillers, literature in general, all the rest of it, I kind of like to leave the politics out of it and just review the writing and the story for the sake of the writing and the story.
Agreed. Agreed. I always try to separate art from from people's politics. I might not like Matt Damon's politics, but I think he's a hell of an actor, and
Right.
I can go in as long as the writer and director aren't being heavy-handed with politics. I can go in and get lost in the character he creates. So I'm a big believer in separate the art from the politics. You cheat yourself if you can't get beyond the artist's politics. It doesn't mean you have to
Oh,
agree with them
absolutely.
if they create stuff you like. So.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with
Yeah.
that 100%. Well, choke point. The
Picked a
first
great title back in September, didn't I?
yeah. Well, the first thing I got to ask you is who does the cover art? Because that's be absolutely beautiful. But I thought Deadfall was one of the best covers I'd seen
Oh,
in a
thank you.
while. The just the aesthetic, the color palette I thought was great. And maybe this is kind of book nerd stuff. But
We've got a great guy. It's the same guy. His name is
okay.
Jimmy Icabelli, and he is the art director at Atria Books. And Jimmy is
Uh,
fantastic. And
yeah.
years ago, Jimmy and I started doing a Zoom call before the book was even complete. Once I kind of was halfway into the book and I understood what the themes were going to be, the setting, really had my arms around the story, I'll do a Zoom call with Jimmy and just download everything I'm thinking about
Oh,
to
really?
him. And with this, with Choke Point, I wanted the dragon to represent the really high end Chinese intelligence unit that Harvath is chasing after. And originally, I wanted the dragon made out of mist or out of smoke because I
Mm,
thought the idea of the dragon being almost like smoke and you couldn't get you couldn't wrap your hands around it to choke it to death. Harvath couldn't.
right.
And we played with smoke on a black cover. We went to like an etched glass. I don't know if you remember those sculptures that were popular in the 80s, like Lalique crystal. And so we went to what would it look like if it was an etched kind of smoky glass. But we ended up with this final art, which I really, really love. And I was just overseas not too long ago, and I was meeting with my publishers in the UK, and they were raving about this cover. So
Yeah.
it's really caught people's attention. And people do judge a book by its cover, so you want people to pull that off the shelf or off the table at the bookstore, and then open the flap and read what the story's about, and hopefully, hopefully they'll purchase it. But that definitely puts them into that funnel that they talk about in sales, right? It puts them in the top of the funnel, and you try to get everybody right through to purchasing and reading the book.
Well, people, authors, they don't really talk about that much. And unfortunately, your eye is drawn. Well, when you're faced with a mass of books like at Barnes and Noble or whatever, it is
Hmm.
plain fact of the matter that your attention will be captured by a by an interesting cover, an artful cover. And I've noticed, and I don't know if this is maybe a resurgence in some books, and it's typically not the thriller genre, and I don't know why, and it's kind of disappointing. I see it more in the fantasy genre,
Hmm.
where you have beautiful edge. I don't know what the technical term for it is, but essentially edge art on the edge side of
Oh,
the book.
yeah, you're right. I've seen that in kind of the fantasy, the
Yes,
romantasy category, but
yes,
particularly the
yes.
fantasy stuff. Yeah, they make exclusive editions where if you look at the pages, the edges of the pages, if you're turning it not spine towards you, but actually paper toward edge towards you,
Right,
yeah, that's
right.
it's kind of cool. I'm sure it's an extra cost for the
Sure.
publisher. It's more ink, and I don't know if every printer can do that either. I don't know if that's a specialty printer, but it is cool though. I think it's kind of neat.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I don't know either. Well, I just think it's cool, and I wish thriller books were created in a similar fashion, or at
Yeah.
least you know some special editions or whatever.
Yeah.
But well, this kind of dovetails into my question. So, your novels don't feel like fantasy, right? They feel like tomorrow's newspaper. I know you've heard that before, and you've built a career on identifying emerging threats. Typically years, you know, sometimes years before they become front page stories. So, as you were writing Choke Point, what real world developments were keeping you up at night?
So probably the biggest one when I was writing Choke Point was the first operation with the Israelis, Operation Midnight Hammer, going into Iran and bombing those facilities and everything. So that was the big kind of geopolitical thing. It doesn't play into this book. I was concerned with then we could talk about the overall concept for Choke Point, where that came from. But Operation Midnight Hammer was the first thing that came along, and so that was the big geopolitical event that happened while I was writing.
Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, if you want to talk about sort of the overview of
Sure.
how the how the narrative behind Choke Point came to be, and that touches on a question I was probably going to ask a little bit later, but do you you know, is this your 25th Harvath?
It is.
Okay,
It is my 25th Arbath.
um so do you start with character? Do you start with narrative first?
It's a good
How,
question.
yeah.
So I start with ideas. So I know I always wrap my books around some big geopolitical set piece. I call what I do faction, where you don't know where the facts end and the fiction begins. And so I've long been fascinated, and my fascination only kicked up when Elon Musk and that whole Doge thing tore through DC and particularly wiped out U.S. aid, which I thought was very interesting to put a bunch of people who don't understand about soft power in diplomacy in charge of eliminating basically government agencies. We're seeing certain things with the Ebola outbreak now. There's ramifications to getting rid of something. It's the old Chesterton's fence argument, where just because you stumble upon a fence in the middle of a field doesn't mean that you should automatically tear it down. If you don't understand why the fence was put up in the first place, maybe do a little bit of work first to figure it out. So soft power is such an important part of who America is. And so when Musk and they were kids basically that just ran rampant through the government, cutting contracts, doing all this stuff. I think net that I don't think the program, their Doge thing was that successful. But I would argue from somebody who's concerned with geopolitics, who's concerned about America's standing in the world and about America's ability to influence world events without going to war. That's my number one thing. I don't ever want America to go to war. I want to see America wield power, and soft power is a part of that. So here's where the idea came from for Choke Point. The Chinese are exceptionally good at wielding a form of soft power that is backed up with money. And the
Right.
Chinese have something called the Belt and Road Initiative.
Mhm.
So what the Chinese will do is they'll identify countries that they want to have influence in, and then they'll pick out infrastructure projects that that country either doesn't have the wherewithal, the know-how to do, or doesn't have the financing. And China will go in and say, "We'll do this for you," whether it's improving their port system, their rail system, their roads, whatever that may be. And with China, then it's the camel's nose in the tent,
Mhm.
because now China's got a foothold in that country, and they can take this and they can turn it into a form of coercion.
Mhm.
It's almost like once you owe the mob money and the mob and you're not paying, and the mob's going to come and either break your legs or ask you to do things for them that you wouldn't have normally done. But now the mob's got their nose in your tent. So the Chinese are able to affect foreign policy, domestic policy in these countries through the Belt and Road Initiative, because once they're there, the country's kind of beholden to Beijing. So there was one country where China proposed something, and the country not only said no, they said hell no. They told the Chinese to go pound sand, and that was Thailand. So the Chinese wanted to carve a canal across the southern portion of Thailand because the Chinese didn't want to run their ships from the South China Sea over to the Indian Ocean through the Strait of Malacca. And the reason they didn't want to was because of us, the United States, because our Navy can choke off that strait like that, and we can prevent
Right.
China from getting their ships, and then China can't transition without a whole hell of a lot of fuel and energy and man hours and everything. They'd have to go all the way around. It's a big deal. So China was pushing on Thailand, and what's really interesting is when the Brits signed their armistice with Thailand after World War II, the Brits said you will never carve a canal across the Kra Isthmus in Thailand. And I'm like,
Interesting.
what the heck did the Brits know in the 1940s
Yeah.
about not allowing Thailand to do a canal there? So it's really fascinating. And so Thailand had a bunch of reasons why they didn't want to do this. And a big reason was they have such a Muslim insurgency problem in southern China, is they
Mm.
were afraid that once they carved a canal, that the Muslims would all go independent and say, we are no longer a part of Thailand. Good luck getting over that canal and getting to us. I mean,
Okay.
obviously there'd be ways to transit the canal and there'd be bridges and stuff like that, but they were really afraid of that. So they told the Chinese, go pound sand. So Thailand is a very historically has been a very unstable country. They've had tons of military coups
Right.
in Thailand, the last one being in 2013, 2014. So I've got this weird head as an author where I look at stuff and I'm like, oh, that's interesting. There's a country that said no to China. Huh. And knowing the Chinese, I'm sure the Chinese haven't given up. I'm sure the Chinese still want that canal across the Kra Isthmus in southern Thailand. And I said, what if the Chinese figured out a way to make things so unstable in Thailand that
Mhm.
another military coup took place to balance everything out? And the Chinese said, we could deal with the military junta in charge better than we could with a civilian government. So
Mhm.
let's really get them. So let's foment trouble in the south with Muslim extremists in the south of Thailand. And now there have been all these border skirmishes with the Cambodians, even though Cambodia is a Chinese client state. Let's get that ratcheted up too. But let's make sure, because the Chinese are congenitally devious, let's make sure there's no Chinese fingerprints on this. So what are we going to do? Well, I thought, okay, where could I pull a bad guy from that I've never pulled from before? And I said, whoa, what if he was one of ours? What if he was an American? What if it was a guy we trained? And I've always been fascinated by this track that existed in the SEAL teams, where the SEALs started picking candidates out of their EOD programs. So
Uh,
the explosive ordnance disposal guys.
yeah, I
So
was
these
going
are
to
like
ask you specifically about that. So that's a real program.
It's a real program. So these EOD guys were kind of, tapped on the shoulder and said, "Hey, would you like to? We think you've got the capabilities to actually go through. We're not gonna help you. We're not gonna put our thumb on the scale, but we actually think you could make it through SEAL training, and we want to put real brilliant guys who know about
Mhm.
bombs on the SEAL teams, because we want to know that you can go in and clear a room, you can kick indoors, shoot bad guys in the face along with your SEAL teammates. We don't want to bring a bomb technician along who's not up to the level of the other operators on the team." So they started doing this. And I thought, oh, wow, what if I took a guy who was unfairly, in his mind, drummed
Mhm.
out of the SEALs
Right.
and said, you know what, F you, America. I'm going to, he's drinking in a bar down in Mexico, and he gets spotted by an ex Mexican intelligence official who's working for one of the cartels, who starts talking to him and realizes, oh my God, if we could get this guy working for one of the cartels in Mexico, it would be amazing the amount of knowledge that he has, what it would do for the cartel that I spot for this guy.
Right,
And
right.
then eventually he gets sick of working for the cartels because he's like, they're a bunch of idiots and they're just, they're just putting each other through the meat grinder. And so his handler, the spotter for the cartels, says, I'm going to take you global. I will solicit jobs for you and everything. I'm going to take you global. So that's my guy, Kevin Kobler,
Mhm.
this bomb maker. He gets drummed out of the SEALs because some of his teammates got killed and he conducted a revenge operation in Anbar province. And there was a lot of collateral damage. He flattened several blocks. He got all the bad guys, but he got a lot of good people too. And so the SEALs unceremoniously kicked him out of the SEAL team. And that's kind of how he lost his identity. Once he was out of the SEALs, he didn't know who he was. And that's why he was susceptible to the cartels in Mexico and eventually got spun out onto the global stage to ply his trade. So it's a guy that was in the SEAL teams at the same time as Harvath, my protagonist. And so that adds this extra kind of, ooh, that's really interesting. So
Right.
now Harvath is hunting essentially one of our own, somebody that has basically the same training that Harvath has had. Actually, a little bit more because this guy knows more about bombs than
Mhm.
Harvath does. So it was kind of a fun way. It's book 25, right, John? So I have to figure out, as I do with every book, 22, 23, 24, how do I give readers a brand new ride? I think we've talked about this, that my novels, it's like I have a theme park, and every year I come out with a new roller coaster. And I
Right.
want to give people a great, great thrill ride on that roller coaster. So, and for benefit of anybody who's watching, listening to this that hasn't heard the two of us talk in the past, I always like to put in my qualifier, which is my books are like the James Bond movies. If you've never read a Brad Thor book before, you don't have to go back and start with book number one. You can
That's
pick
right.
up Choke
Hmm.
Point, which is the latest, and you'll get caught up right away. The
Right.
Bond movies doesn't matter if you've ever seen one before, you can go see the latest, and my books are the same.
Well, I love the bad guy character whose motivation you can relate to and almost and almost agree with, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
the bad guy character that's a little bit more complex, that isn't the comic book sort of bad guy character.
Mustache twirling. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Tying some defenseless mate
Woman to the train
to the
tracks,
train
right?
to the train tracks. So this guy I liked quite a bit, as a
Oh,
matter
I'm glad
of
to
fact. I
hear
thought he
that.
was a really interesting character. And I also like the way that you highlight China's destabilization operations, and people here in America don't appreciate that, and they'll see things that go on in the news, and they'll take it at face value, and
Yeah.
they don't understand and appreciate the gray world that exists where there are information operations and a lot of the subversive and the conflict that we see amongst disparate groups in America
Yes.
are not
No.
organic at all. And so I like it when fiction, particularly your fiction, hits on and highlights these truths, and hopefully it raises the awareness of the American public to what China and not, Russia and other.
Iran, North Korea,
Yes.
they are pushing on cultural fault lines. And this is
Yes.
one of the things I see, particularly like older members of my family, and some younger ones too, but particularly older members of my family who are in Facebook groups, right? They get in these groups, and I always tell them, I say, listen, it's energizing to be around people who are of like mind. I get that. I get that. I don't want you online fighting with people all day. I don't want you fighting at all online.
Right.
And so I understand why it's good to be in places where people think the way you do. I said, but here's what you have to understand is that America's enemies know that when you're around like-minded people, your guard drops.
That's
And
right.
so this is where the Koreans, the North Koreans, the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese, they are doing operations to influence the way Americans are thinking, particularly about each other. So they will go into these Facebook groups or other kinds of chat rooms, and you think that you are discussing something with someone of like mind. So your defenses are down, and you take what they tell you as gospel. You actually believe it because they think the way. So they're using your guard being down against you. And I think we have very bad. I think we have very bad digital hygiene, if you will.
Mhm.
I think if Americans realize it's like scams proliferate, right? The scams have gotten very sophisticated now with AI. Those Nigerian prince scams that used to always be given away because of terrible spelling or grammar. Now AI is helping them. I think now more than ever, as Americans, we have to be very careful, not only things that would threaten us from the outside, but also things inside, because we are a union in this country, but our enemies want to create disunity, and we need to guard against that.
Well, the objective, and I can't remember the technical term for it, is that they actually want you to think that it's your own idea, and that goes to what you're talking about, where you think you're in a friendly environment and you think you're having a an honest discussion, right? And you're really not. You're being manipulated. And so these are very practiced, very capable intelligence operatives. And I think people think that, well, we're not living in a Cold War environment anymore, and we're not dealing with KGB and all these traditional intelligence apparatus. But yes,
No,
we
it's
are. The KGB, frankly, is still alive and well, even though it's called SVR or you know,
yeah.
by
FSB, SVR. I mean, all whether it's the military intelligence side or more the civilian side, yeah. And they benefit from a weaker America. They benefit when we're at each other's throats when because it erodes our confidence in ourselves as citizens and in our nation. So it benefits them overall if we're arguing and bickering and fighting with each other here at
it's
home.
demoralizing, right?
Yes, that's
It's
exactly what it is.
demoralizing.
It's a morale issue.
Mm.
It's absolutely a morale issue. Well said.
Hey, I gotta commend you actually on a phrase that Harvath spoke in chapter 5, referring to our ERT team.
Ah,
And,
yes.
and Harvath says, and I quote, "They're the
Okay.
best. If anyone can get to the bottom of this, it's the Bureau."
Yes.
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 And I'm like, truer words were never spoken in fiction.
Yeah, no, listen, well, you know that I have a long history with the Bureau, and I used to go to the it was the National Executive Institute NEIA meeting every summer in Sun Valley, Idaho, back when you could go for 10 days. It
Right.
wasn't crazy, and the director would come and speak, and so I got to meet Robert Mueller, and I think I met Louis Freeh. I can't remember how far back I go, but anyway, it's I've always been quite impressed with the FBI because I got to know the quality of the agents, particularly senior agents, people who had spent careers there. And so in my book, it opens with a series of bombings in Bangkok. And so I was taken back to the Bali bombings in my mind in Indonesia that happened several years ago and what the response looked like there and how those bombings were staggered too. So you had one bomb go off, people flooded out into the streets for safety and to see what was going on. And then another bomb in a vehicle went off right there in the street. And the support that the FBI gave to Indonesia to help try to figure out, what kind of bombs were these? Was there a signature? What kind of, evidence could be recovered? And the FBI, nobody does that as well. Nobody's even close to
Right.
the ERT stuff that the FBI does. So that's kind of a neat thing. I think there's going to be a lot of readers that aren't even familiar that the FBI has that capability and fields those teams at a moment's notice. And they'll put them on a plane and send them to a country halfway around the world just to help get to the bottom of what happened. So it's kind of cool.
Well, this is another example of fiction, speaking truth, right? And fiction actually being a very important part of our culture and our society. And it's not just escapism. Your books certainly aren't. Although they're very entertaining, and as you said before, they're a great, kind of summer by the pool read, and they move. And I really appreciate, especially, the chapter structure. The chapters are short and they're meant to, they keep you going, and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff is great. But things like this, especially, and of course, it's a little bit tongue in cheek, with regard to Harvath's statement, but it is good. It's good to have Harvath's stamp of approval, especially in light of all the controversy we've seen in the past few years about weaponization and the FBI's role in some of that stuff. But that is not today's FBI. And regardless of your politics or what you feel about Trump or whatever, the plain fact of the matter is, and I can say this quite positively that Patel and Patel's FBI are moving in the right direction, and they've made
Mm.
some great strides. And I love seeing in mechanisms of our culture, like fiction, the Bureau being portrayed in the way, in my opinion, that it should be portrayed. So, as a retired agent, I appreciate that, and
Oh,
I
good.
thank you for that.
Good. It's a tremendous organization that has done so much good for our country. I don't have to tell you, you had a career there, and I think the world of the men and women that work tirelessly to keep us safe. And I think of all the different crimes. Oh my gosh, I don't think I could. If you took one of my books, I don't know that I could list every single type of crime that the FBI goes after. I think the average citizen doesn't realize how much
Right.
the FBI is involved in fighting crime. So it's a great organization. I'm very fond of it, and it's always a pleasure for me to show parts of it that people aren't familiar with. And what's interesting is, I've had so many people over the years say, "Well, I decided to go into law enforcement because I was a reader of your books and I really
Yeah,
like
right.
what that represents," or into the
Right.
military, or I went to work in the diplomatic corps. So it's kind of nice to hear that the way that I portray, and it's not overly um, rosy. I mean, there's an
Sure.
FBI. I've had FBI agents that had different involvements and were in different departments that were more successful than others or weren't pulling their weight. It's every organization's filled with human beings, right? But it's
Well,
what's the standard that you hold yourselves to? We
mhm.
all fall short. We all fall short. And so it's what's the standard? And I've always admired the standard that the FBI holds itself to.
Well, I appreciate it, and I really like to emphasize I like having the opportunities to emphasize the point that fiction, good fiction, is culturally relevant, and that it speaks
Hmm.
truth, and that it is worthy of people's time, right? So, to me, that's a very important point. And it, I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but essentially references like that kind of prove that point in my mind. But a question I did want to ask you is, so 25 novels later, what have you learned about Scott Harvath that you didn't know when you introduced him in Lions of Lucerne?
Oh, well, it's funny because when I first wrote Harvath, I didn't know that there was going to be a second Harvath book. I
Uh,
was a big Michael Crichton fan, and Michael Crichton, I would gobble up those books, and he really wasn't doing any repeats of characters. They were often just on to the next set of characters. And I thought, oh, that would be fun to be able to create a new protagonist with a different background, different situation where he was in the world and who he was and everything. And my publisher said, "Listen, we've gotten such great feedback about Harvath. We want you to keep writing him." And then my editor said to me, said, "How many characters have you've picked up the book and you've read The Flap by an author you like, and maybe the setting is a place in the world that even if I gave you a plane ticket right now, you wouldn't want to go to. But because it's that character that you've been on so many rides with before, you're going to get in the car next to him and take another ride because it's
right.
always fun with that character." And I'm like, "Oh, I read a lot like that." And she goes, "Exactly." And so that's why Harvest's been around. What was interesting, I think, the most for me is developing this concept over time. And I talk about it on Memorial Day all the time and at different points throughout the year. What Harvath taught me, the one thing that I really learned from this character is that there is no American dream without those willing to protect it. It
Absolutely.
doesn't exist.
Right.
And that's the most profound and probably the most deeply moving thing I've learned from Harvath.
Well, I don't want to keep you too much longer. Let me ask you one more question.
Sure.
As a craftsman, is there one particular chapter that stands out in Choke Point more than other? Is there one chapter that you're particularly proud of?
So there's one that really resonated. So there's a couple of things, the watches that are in there. I thought that that
Oh yeah,
that
the time
yeah,
map.
so those are yeah,
Right.
so those are real. I'd always wanted to put one of those in the book, but I've got to tell you, right at the end, as a certain subset of the bad guys are trying to get away. I pictured that ending scene, the morning. I talk about the mist in the banana plantations as they're driving through, trying to get to the Thai border with Singapore and everything, and just the mist rising and the sun's coming up and it's kind of sparkling over the ocean. And then I just have this, I don't want to spoil it for whoever hasn't read the
Sure.
book yet, but at
Right.
the end, I just had this kind of Brian De Palma uh, director's vision in my head of how that would play out on film, how that last scene happens there. It's a little bit of the toll booth in Godfather, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? And it's a little bit of Brian De Palma. It's just all that stuff kind of comes together for me right then. So, and listen, I have to tell you, when you're at that point in the book as an author, you are so excited because it's like, oh, I'm doing the wrap up. I'm right there,
Right.
So it's a very emotional point for an author because you're like, I made it. I'm running through the tape. It's my 25th marathon and I nailed it.
Right.
That's what it is for me.
Well, you did nail it. This
Thank
is
you.
another, it's another addition into this Scott Harvath universe that your fans are really going to love and enjoy. And you kind of touched on this a little bit, but so do you have any updates in terms of the film?
So the film, I just reached out to our partners on the film, Pete Berg's company, and so Pete, I love Pete, and he's done, he did, gosh, what did he do? Well, the biggest one is he did my buddy Marcus Luttrell's movie, Lone Survivor.
Oh, oh,
And
oh,
he did Patriot Day with Wahlberg. He's done a lot with
oh,
Wahlberg.
very
They have a
cool.
really good
Uh-huh.
relationship. So I reached out to Ezra, one of the producers on it, Ezra Emanuel, who is just, I got to tell you, he's Ari Emanuel's son. So you've got the three brothers. You've got Ram Emanuel, you've got Zeke, who's the doctor, and then you've got Ari. And the Jeremy Piven character, from what I understand, in Entourage was based on
Oh,
Ari Emanuel, the big, powerful LA agent. And Ezra's delightful. He is the most polite guy. They've still got their Chicago ties, so we talk a lot about Chicago because I'm a
oh,
Chicago guy and they're a Chicago
yeah.
family. So Ezra is one of the most, he is hands down one of the best people I've ever dealt with in Hollywood. And so he's the person when I want an update, I reach out to Ezra because I know Pete's finishing this new movie about a few NFL guys that signed up after Pearl Harbor and went to Iwo Jima. It's based
Uh-huh.
on a book called The Mosquito Bowl, and they don't make it back. They play
Uh-huh.
their last football game in Australia before going to, and that's Pete's new movie for Netflix. So I reached out to Ezra, who's delightful. I never need a reason, but I had a reason to say, hey, Ezra, what's going on? Just checking in. I just turned in, the final edits on Choke Point. So this was a couple months ago. And I said, where are we? What's going on with the movie? And he said, well, Nick is now actively writing the screenplay. And Nick Pizzolatto did the adaptation of The Magnificent Seven with Chris Pratt,
Oh,
and he created the HBO series True Detective, which the first season was Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey,
oh,
which was
oh.
a great series. Every season I've really loved of that show. So anyway, so Nick is down in Texas. I think he's in Austin, but Nick is banging away on his typewriter and he's working on the script. So I'm hoping some point this summer I'll
Yeah,
be sitting by a pool somewhere with I'll look like Mr. Hollywood, my sunglasses on, prescription lenses at my age, but
right.
I'll be sitting there, reading the script for Cold Zero. But they said they weren't going to change it. They told me, Nick said, Brad, we're putting it. This thing is so good the way the book is laid out. He
Yeah,
said
yeah,
when we
yeah.
pitched it to Netflix, we had no changes to it. We want to do it just the way it is here, and we want it to be a bigger, bolder, more badass Hunt for Red October. We wanted to do even better than Hunt for Red October
Right.
and have stuff people have never seen before. And I'm like, oh, great. From your lips to God's ears. Let's see what
And
happens.
that's
Knock
got to
on
be
wood.
so cool as an author because so many books, right? They go to Hollywood or whatever and they look radically different. And I understand the book is the book and the movie is the movie or whatever, but it's got to be really gratifying to know that it's past muster, so to speak, at Hollywood and they don't have any changes. I
That's
don't know.
yeah. We'll see. We'll see what happens. Harlan, I love Harlan Coben. Harlan Coben is just a terrific human being, and I have a nice relationship with Harlan. And Harlan was just speaking about this exact fact at Thriller Fest in New York.
Oh,
And Harlan, somebody asked him about it. He said, "Listen," he said, "my job is to write the best book I can. I'm
mm,
not a TV writer. I'm not a TV producer. I don't write my books so that they can get made by Hollywood or the BBC, whatever." He said, "So what I do is I partner with the best people I can find and trust that they know their craft so well that if they're do have to be changes, that those changes are only going to make the story better and
better.
better for the medium,
Right.
right?" So sometimes the worst stuff, as Harlan has said, the worst stuff you see is where they try to be too true to the original source material. They try to be too honest at adapting it. And you look at somebody like John Irving. So much of John Irving's stuff he's stayed so tightly in control of, particularly Cider House Rules, and it's because you've had the writer there kind of at your elbow, the writer of the original material. You can say, "I want to change this," and at least the writer, and this is what's great about my relationship with these guys, is if there is a change, I can say, "Okay, I get it. I see now you've explained why you need to do the change, but just understand from a story standpoint, the readers who are coming to see the movie are going to expect you, if you have to change this piece here, downstream it changes this. So don't forget this piece downstream."
Right.
Okay? Because if you do, we have what we call with our readers and with viewers of TV shows and movies, you're engaging in a bit of a social contract where they're willing to suspend their disbelief
Mm,
as long as you don't. I use the term bump them. Yeah, I don't want to give you a speed bump in a
right.
book or in a TV show or movie where you're like, the heck was that? What was that? So you try to keep it smooth, but you trust that you partner with great people who will do the work justice, but will also do it in such a way that it'll be super successful. Because in the end, with the way streaming goes and everything, you're very likely with a successful movie or TV show to reach more people than you do readers, more viewers than you do
Yeah.
readers, and those
Right.
people could become readers. So
Right.
it's in everybody's best interest that the work is done. You leave it all on the field, you do your absolute best, and then you kind of rub that rabbit's foot and hope you get lucky because it is a bit like getting hit by lightning.
Well, I'm looking forward to it, and I know that if it's faithful to the book in terms of as much as it can be, and still be good for the medium, that it's going to be fantastic. Because Cold Zero was a really, really very well written story, very engaging, entertaining. All the facts are right. All this stuff. No speed bumps, like you just said. So looking forward very much to that coming out. Netflix, right?
Yeah, so that'll be in Netflix. So I don't know what the schedule is because they write the script and then they actually have a person has a job to go through it with like a ruler to figure out what the budget will be. And
Oh,
so,
really?
yeah, my guys have said, hundreds of millions of dollars is what they want to spend on it. And they want to have a big budget for it and all this kind of stuff. So somebody goes through and costs it out and
Uh,
says, okay, based on where you want to film and all this kind of stuff, and
right,
we can go shoot up in Canada this winter and that can stand in for the Arctic. We don't have to go up to the North Pole to do this, of course.
right.
So anyway, it'll be cool to see the process unfold because I have not been through a movie from start to finish. So this will be exciting for me. As long as I get that director chair and they let me keep it that says Brad Thor on the back of the chair. And I want a picture, like there's a famous picture of Ian Fleming, like on the set of Dr. No, and he's leaning over his director chair. So I want one of those for
It
my
should be in
archives.
your contract.
I
Speak to
should
your
bring that in.
speak. You need to talk to your agent about
I
that.
do.
Your
I do.
contract.
I'll have to reach out to her. Yeah. Good point.
Well, Brad, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. I don't want to monopolize your time anymore this afternoon. And it's always a pleasure speaking to you. And Choke Point is a fantastic book, a worthy addition to the Scott Harvath universe. So, my
Thank
town
you.
hall review, I'm going to try to get that out the day your book drops, which is the 16th. Is
16th.
that right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Tuesday before Father's Day.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So this will go up on my Substack and my social so people can check out our conversation as well. So thanks
Perfect.
again. I really appreciate it. Always great talking to you.
You too, John. Thanks very much.
You're welcome.